I'm excited for us to get started today on our series around reading and writing connections in text and text structures. As always, we love to give a tribal land acknowledgement. And here's an example of where you can find your local native land acknowledgements as well from OSPI. We're going to go ahead and start today with the land acknowledgement to respect and affirm tribal sovereignty of these lands and to acknowledge the importance of the school district connections with their neighboring tribes and their services. Thanks, Effie. Which then leads us into our OSPI equity statement, which is a great way to ground ourselves in our work today. I invite everyone to take a moment and just take a look at this and maybe pick a word or phrase that sticks out to them. And Alicia, I saw your message in the chat. Thank you for that. If you guys want to be in a room with others, please choose a number to put before your name and pick the same number. That way we can find you easily when we're setting up those breakout rooms. Awesome.
I do have a resource to share on this one, a couple of new things. One is the Black and Disabled series on YouTube by Ladera Horn. And then the other is one that I recently found, which was from the Reading League, spotlighting 5 African-American scholars, practitioners, and
Thank you, Alicia. And just so everyone knows, Alicia is coming to us from a secret location. No, just kidding. She's at her hotel. So in case she comes in and out a little bit, I think she's got some internet that we're working with as well. Spokane.
Okay, so thinking about frameworks leading towards working towards the tiered system for teaching literacy to all students, and that this involves all educators, so para-educators, administrators, teachers, everyone involved, specialists. So we're building as a community into that, and part of that comes from systems and structures. So we have all of those pieces that we know that go into place with running and managing the day-to-day operations of a school and getting kids where they need to be for the right support. And you can always reach out to your regional implementation coordinator for MTSS. It's on the website of each of your ESDs and also on the OSPI website. ESD 112 is fortunate enough to have 2. And just reach out to me if you have any questions for me to get them involved in the work you're doing. They have certain districts they work with based on grants and but provide support across the board for implementation. Okay, and then instructional and curriculum, instructional routines, differentiated instruction, literacy components, all the systematic and explicit evidence-based curriculum, support, specific interventions, all of that is, you have the resources of the regional literacy coordinators, which I am one of those, and partner with all of the other 8 ESDs. So if you're ever looking to see who that might be, let me know and I will connect you. And again, this is to support the work of supporting all students for all educators. So the system power and the human power all wrapped up in together. And then really focusing for us is on, with these courses, has been on the instructional and curriculum portion of it, but we weave in as we can the other areas of system and structures when applicable.
Thanks, Effie. So here's some Zoom tips and reminders as we're going through our learning today. If you don't mind renaming your icon on the top, if you kind of hover over your little picture, you can see the 3 dots and you can choose to rename yourself. And if you don't mind adding your district to that as well, having your video on is helpful. Having yourself muted when you're not talking is helpful. And we can also access the mute button as well for you in case you need that support. At any time, if you need any help, you can raise your hand. And so there's a way to do that down at the bottom of the screen. And then we are going to be doing some annotating at times. So at the top of your screen, you'll see you are viewing Effie's screen, and then it says view options. If you click the view options button down at the bottom, it says annotate. And from that, there's an option to click stamps or typing or even drawing on there as well. So those are just going to be some of the ways that we're going to engage in our Zoom today. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat as we go through as well. And raising hand is hidden under the reactions. So when you click reactions, it says play chime or recognize hand gestures. Thank you. Effie. And
No, all the fun
just
stuff.
remember all the little fun things because it's interactive.
And that's my
Why
fault.
not?
Okay.
And then on the next screen, we're going to talk about some norms. So I invite you to take a look at the norms that we have for working together today and maybe choose one to hold on to as something that you're going to work on as you go through this work today. So go ahead and you can do this in the chat, but this is just a quick little activator for us. Which landscape most resonates with how you're feeling right now? So feel free to put the number in the chat, and maybe you can even put a little like word or phrase as to why you pick that. You can also annotate, so feel free to use the stamp annotation. I see someone already put a heart on number 2. Which looks like a crashing waves on a dock. That's Alicia. And number 6 is an astronaut, in case you're wondering, because I think that did come up earlier. And we have a number 2 again. Eric is an 8. I wish I was an 8 right now. Rachel, the astronaut. Robin, lots of things are happening at the same time. 2 does resonate that. I do see that in there. 9 gives me a little bit of that also. Cameron picked 9. Melissa picked 1. Thanks, Mary. We got quite a few 2s today. Well, thank you for engaging that. Luckily, we have no number 5s so far. So, and Effie's a number 9. She feels like she's rushing around.
At least the number 5 is leaning
More,
like it's gonna stabilize rather than leaning the other direction.
that's true. I didn't think of it that way. Yeah, I think I'm a 4 today. I'm feeling like I want to be amongst the wildflowers. Well, thank you everyone for engaging in this little activator activity. It's so fun to just kind of use an image to kind of check in and regroup and reconnect from time to time. So I invite you to consider that in your work. We're going to move into introductions. I am Nina Sotomayor Andrew. I support ESD 114 around literacy and instructional supports. I'm going to let Effie introduce herself.
I am Effie Trial. As I said, I'm one of the regional literacy coordinators in the state. And so I'm in Vancouver, Washington at ESD 112. And that's a year and a half or so picture with my daughter on the 4th of July, who's a senior in high school. And so I support all things with Title I and multilingual as well at the ESD in Vancouver. And then, Alicia, do you want to mention Rebecca?
I will. Also, I think we don't have anyone new. If I'm wrong, please go ahead and correct me in that. And Rebecca has been supporting us behind the scenes. She's the one on the bottom right. And I'm not muted, right? I don't even see captions.
You're good.
Okay. I'll make sure that everything's working and trying to be the background person here. But I'm with ESD 113. And I think that since we don't have anyone new who's with us today, let's just keep going. Let's see.
Whoops.
Okay, whoops, we went too far twice. I'll get the Jamboard link. I'm going to stop controlling, let you do that, Effie.
Okay, I'm gonna control.
Okay, give it up, and I'll get the resources and things for people.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
Lucy is gonna get the resources, and then on the Jamboard, some introductions.
Yeah, we're gonna have an opportunity, once you guys get a chance to access the Jamboard, go ahead and share your name, role, grade level, and content area.
If you haven't done that already.
Yeah, and just if you want to update the one that you already put in there, feel free to do that as well.
And I'm just going to grab the resources on everything. Okay.
And then just a reminder, we're going to be continuing this series. Today we're doing reading, writing, connection, and we're talking about syntax and text structures. And then we do have the other 3 dates listed below as a reminder of our other times together in the future.
And this is just the plan for the day, as we followed the same pattern for every course, every class to review, reflect, connect, the new learning, practice for application, and closure and next steps.
Okay, so I think I'm taking this one, correct?
Mhm.
So, all right. Maybe I'll try annotate. I'll let you go background. Go ahead and keep going. No worries, everyone. I'll try and take remote control on this one again. Let's see if that works. And we'll just keep moving forward on that. So as a reminder of what we did last time, hopefully everyone was with us last time. There we go. Went too far. We did talk about when we were talking about I'm going to bring up the big one again. Language comprehension. Remember the top side of the reading rope. We talked about ways to acquire and teach vocabulary and morphology and background knowledge. I actually brought with me on the plane the reading comprehension blueprint by Nancy Hennessy, and that really diving into all of this stuff because it's really what do we need to make sure that all of our kids can do in order to make sense of what they're reading. So click, there we go. So one of the things, this comes from Nancy Hennessy's book, that she talks about with background knowledge, that it's really, we don't pay enough attention to it. We really need to make sure that we are activating and assessing our students' background knowledge, that we find ways to build their background knowledge and connect their background knowledge to what they're reading right now, and so that we can make connections and build their knowledge base. So this is one of the things we talked about last time. And I just want to prime your brain because soon we're going to give you an opportunity to reflect and connect in a breakout room and talk about it. If there's been any new learning, any things that you connect to, or anything that's been circling for you since we last got together. Additionally, click, there we go. When we talked about the word level understanding of words and how complicated, how much there is to know about words. We need to understand how words, what they actually mean. That's the denotation, but what they mean in context and the kind of feeling of them is the connotation. It helps if we understand some opposites, the antonyms. And we did talk about last time how antonyms could either be gradable. So for example, hot and cold, remember there are gradations in between, or they could be complementary, like black or white. Okay, there are gradations in between, but those recall them something else. So it is, or like dead or alive. It either is or it isn't, because you can't be partially one, even though regardless of what the Princess Bride says when he said he's mostly dead or partially dead. No, if he's partially alive, then he's partially alive. He's not dead. So that's the different kinds of antonyms. of course, thinking about gradations of synonyms and nuances of synonyms. And then, of course, what is it in context? I mean, if we're talking about a bank, are we talking about someplace where you go and deposit money, or are you someplace talking about the edge of a river where you go to fish? So the context really matters in that. So we talked about all the lots of different ways of looking at word level meaning. As I thought, if I clicked it, there we go. Here we go. There we go. As well as talking about the form of the words. So not just the meaning, but also not only the phonological form, but also the meaningful form, which we call morphemes. So we talked a little bit about free morphemes, those ones that can stand alone, and bound morphemes, those that can't. And in our older learners, those are the ones that really can build their vocabulary and really can be complicated and trip them up. So that's really where we can use a lot of strength and a lot of supports and a lot of teaching to go in to help our kids there. Click. There we go. There, oops, let me try and get that away from there for us. There we go. So we talked about how morphology and adding suffixes changes sounds of words. Notice in prefer, preference, we lose a syllable. Sane to sanity, we go from long to short. Electric, electricity, we have that soft, hard and soft C. Philosophy, philosophical, we change where the accent is. And then, of course, we have our orthographic changes as well. Sometimes you see control, we doubled the L. When we added on a suffix that began with a vowel. Derive, we dropped the E when we added a suffix that began with a vowel. And then deny, we changed the Y to I when we added a suffix that just didn't start with an I. Happy that way. Okay. We thought I clicked it. It's, you know, as I always say, technology is great until it's not. And of course, it goes way too many. We talked about a procedure for teaching vocabulary. And I will grab that link for that into the chat box as well for you to explore while you're in your breakout groups. If you didn't have a chance to be with us last time, we're just trying to prime your mind as you are thinking about reviewing what we did and getting ready to enter into the new learning, which today we're going to be focusing on the of the decoded. Said I'm in a hotel room. I only have one screen here. So before we move on to the next piece, we're going to give you some connect and discuss time. And I'm going to put you in breakout rooms to share and talk about the things that we had talked about last time. What's primed you, what resonated with you? Is there something that you've been thinking about? And then we're going to get into syntax and text structures after that. Okay, so let's see if I can make breakout rooms. I'm going to pause the recording, Zoom recording, and thank you for moving to the whole group sharing. Let's hear from, we had 3 groups, I think. So hopefully each group will have a chance to either unmute and share or share in the chat something you discussed. And I'm going to open it up to whoever wants to unmute.
Lacey, I'm going to stop sharing, and I think it encourages more conversation.
Sure.
Then we'll go back to sharing.
We did on the last slide, did we not say you should choose someone to be your chairperson?
We'll choose a few volunteers to briefly share their group's thoughts.
Okay.
Ooh, I like that.
Oh, I was gonna say I can share for us.
Okay, thanks, Alyssa.
One of the things that we were talking about, so I think we were talking about the morphemes, is that right? And then we kind of went off on our own little tangent. But one of the things that we talked about, or that I shared, was when I teach it, it's usually during like my learning targets because I teach math. And so when we're within my learning targets, we're looking for action words. We're looking for what is it that we're doing, and how do we know if we're going to be successful. And so sometimes I'll take that opportunity where I'll be like, hey, let's look at these two words. What does this mean? And I pull them apart a little bit, even deeper, because they're like a quick few minute things. But it's a little bit more trickier in math, I find, to teach explicitly some of the concepts.
Mhm.
Uh,
But Alyssa, when you mentioned math and that, I had a conversation last week with a math special ed teacher. And we were talking about the prefixes bi and die, and like biannual or bicycle, but then dissect or diameter. And they were like, but wait, what do those mean? I said, well, they're both two, but and she said, why do we have two of them? I said, well, because they're from two different languages. One comes from Greek and one comes from Latin. Just like we have like unicycle, and we have mono, like monograph, thank you. Yeah.
Monolingual.
There we go, monolingual versus
yeah.
bilingual. Mhm. Yeah, so
Yeah.
complicated. Thanks, Alyssa.
Monocule, like a.
That's the word. I was trying to think of monocle, but I couldn't
Monocle.
pronounce it in my head.
Rob, I think I saw you unmuting too.
I can share, since I kind of talked the most. My group, I kind of just shared some things in my role because I'm kind of at a district role. And so last time I just really was thinking about, so because I'm an instructional facilitator, I help teams of teachers. And this idea of vocabulary being tied to background knowledge, just really, I thought that was an access point for a lot of my teachers to start using words, not just as a word study, but also as a way to get students practicing words on their tongue, because that's a problem in our district of just getting kids to read and practicing it. So I kind of presented this idea, and a few of us tried it, where we took a text and we pulled words out that we thought that kids would trip up on for certain reasons, or where you really needed background knowledge connection. And then we just did open sorts, put them on cards. They open sorted it so that the students were thinking about meaning, but also saying the words multiple times out loud. And then that was the pre-reading strategy into the text.
I love it, Robin, especially because, I think one of the most misunderstood things on sorts is that the first step is lay and say. People forget that one, that sorts should be done orally, not just through the written form. So that's I've been writing things down. I appreciate that. Thanks, Robin.
I was
Go ahead.
at I was co-hosting a PSYOP training yesterday, and a math teacher was talking about sorts and getting kids to sort items in particular, and that she just would say, give them the items and be like, now sort again, now sort again.
And explain your reason for each time.
Yeah.
Though. That's
And
the
she's
thing, that
like,
world piece.
as they got to exactly explain it, and then as they got to, not all of them got it to like the third level of resorting, but just that opportunity to keep doing that. So as a middle school teacher in Vancouver, that happened to be one of my daughter's teachers, so she's awesome. And so that just kind of that whole sorting, I was like thinking about that yesterday. So I'm glad, Robin, you brought that up again.
And that makes me think of that game that you introduced me to. My daughter loves it. We play it every night. When we do the Wordle, and now we do Stattle, and we do Wordle. But this one, the connections,
Connections.
is it New York Times, right? And how do these words connect? And sometimes it's like, well, word could go this way or this way, depending on which meaning you're talking about, and trying to find those connections. You should put a link to it in the chat.
Yeah, I should try and find that.
Because that was a fun one. There was a third room, if anybody else would like to share from that room before we get back.
I don't mind sharing, but there's two of us, including me, that wasn't here last week, and then one of us that was there. But in general, as summation, It's really, I feel like we're talking about background knowledge and how that affected the students' interest in the reading and understanding and the comprehension of the passages. And it was just, I had brought up the interesting thing that I go, well, when you're trying to progress monitor with kids, and you're trying to look for that growth, and then they get a passage that they have no background knowledge about, it's a good thing to note that, this is one that was very obvious. I think the example was, the sport, if you have a student that is from Mexico and is, loves soccer and is all about soccer, and then you pull a passage around baseball, which they've never played. They have no idea. Bases, first base, second base, what is that? So, to read a passage about soccer versus baseball, they would definitely have a better understanding around the context of a soccer passage versus a baseball. So those little things.
So true, Melissa. Did I share last time the example of the Dust Bowl, the Rose Bowl, the Dust Bowl example that I have? So when I was teaching high school, we had I think it was like the Wyatt 2 or 3 at the time. Maybe it's just the 2. Anyway, one of the sentences was that the Great Dust Bowl started when it quit raining in large parts of, it listed 3 states. And then the question was, what does the sentence say that the Great Dust Bowl was? Well, it doesn't. There's a huge inference having to be made there because it says the Great Dust Bowl started when it quit raining. And I had a student who was Mexican American, and his answer was a football game. There's the Rose Bowl, the Orange Bowl, and the Dust Bowl. Why not? It started when it quit raining. It's like that background knowledge is so crucial.
But I like how they got to football. That's pretty cute.
Yeah, it was a great answer. Well, thank you for sharing, everyone. We do have a lot that we want to touch on tonight. We're talking about reading, writing connection, syntax and text structures. And I cannot tell you, the reading and writing connection has been so much my new area. I mean, Effie, I think you've probably heard this from me more than anybody. Nina, you're probably going to nod your head too, but teaching reading through writing is becoming my new mantra. It really, really is. The more I read about that connection and the more I see about, the more that we do for our students to help them with writing, the more they're going to get better at reading. Not so much the other way around. So really, the bigger bang from our buck is to get them writing. So let's get to that writing to read. I have some resources here I'm going to try and put into the chat box for you. One is the Language Literacy Network, and I really like how she has combined the reading rope with writing. And so this is from Learning by Design, but also an article from Carnegie Publications on evidence for how writing can improve reading. And these were kind of like the big 3 that they came out with from that, which was that when you're writing, you are building your sound symbol connections for decoding. There's a very strong research evidence of a speech to print advantage over a to speech advantage. So while it is easier print to speech because I can decode something and figure it out much more easily than writing it, especially with all the homonyms we have in our language, when I'm putting it speech to print, it's going to make stronger connections in my brain. The executive function skills is something I don't think we talk about enough. And I love this section on this publication that I just put in the chat box. Because if we think about how much executive function it takes to read something lengthy and to really spend time with a passage or a book or a novel, that it takes a lot of attention, it takes sticking to it, it takes weeding out extra things and focus. There's so many executive functioning skills that we can develop and strengthen through our attention into writing. And it actually just builds comprehension skills too. So, these are 3 things I definitely encourage people to jump into more on the writing to read. When we're talking about the language comprehension though, we're talking about here now, we're starting about syntax and genres and other things that can help us with our, resend the link, yes. The one I was just raving about, the Carnegie review, there you go. So as we were just talking about background knowledge and vocabulary, But we can't forget syntax, because especially as kids get older, the syntax that they read is going to be far more complex than the syntax that they speak. So very often, you don't have appositives typically in your speech. We don't start with, however that is going to go, I guess I'll go along with it. We don't start with these. I mean, we might try to encourage our kids to do so, but that's not natural speech for us. And it's funny with this slide with the simple view of reading, we have the language comprehension and the word reading, or it's your word recognition or piece, reading comprehension. I saw this, I think yesterday or recently this week when I was teaching, and I thought, well, I want to change that W to writing and reading, or writing to read. To be emphasizing that connection. So where we want to start is the sentences. Sentences are such an crucial piece. There's another article I just found today from Nancy Wexler on the importance of the sentence. Nancy Hennessy in her book, The Reading Comprehension, talks about the importance of the sentence. We don't spend enough time paying attention to how sentences are constructed and helping make sure that our older kids understand that construct and where this phrase it means and what it means and how it goes. So this is the emphasis here on syntax. Notice that we have to understand those words, which we talked last time about the fact that sometimes 95 isn't even enough depending on which words. But you can understand all of those words, but still struggle with it if you don't have the background knowledge and if the syntax is too complex. So things to think about as we go back to and remember our structured literacy step ladder, that now we're focusing in the syntax. You know, people, I struggle, I will say, where do I put syntax? Well, it goes into the oral language, but it also goes into the fluency piece, because it helps me move from reading word by word, which I can do with just my knowledge of orthography and phonics, to reading phrases by phrases and understanding that, for example, the phrase under the table tells where, and it might describe a thing. So it might be being used as an adjective, but it might tell how, okay, under the table doesn't tell how, but it might be describing an action. She was sitting under the table. So now it's being used as an adverb. So helping kids see how that one phrase under the table, it might tell you placement, but what's it doing in that sentence? And so hence that emphasis for fluency, but also for comprehension. It's really in those top two. And it's in the Common Core. Notice what we're talking about. This is the language progressive skills by grade. This is from page 30 of the Common Core ELA. And notice where we're talking, number 3, choose words and phrases for effect. Choose your words and phrases to convey ideas precisely. Let's place our phrases and clauses so that we understand really how our sentences work. So the first one starting in 3rd grade, but then look at the second one, 4th, and we starting into 6th grade, our older kids are expected to know all this. So I'm just going to pause for a moment here and just kind of open up to our smaller group today. Do your 6th graders have all of those other ones already? Or do they need, I'm seeing Nina nodding her head. Melissa, I saw you on mute.
I don't think so. Oh, I did. I must have. I'm not sure. Because I'm not working strictly with a specific class. I support all the middle schools and all the high schools. So for specifically 6th grade, I'm not as familiar with the standards.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to draw it, is look how many things we assume that they're able to do already. What, L3 through 5 here. Shifts in verb tense. Ensuring subject and pronoun agreement. That can even be complicated. Lots of assumptions there, aren't there?
I remember my 6th graders, God, I probably taught over 2,000 of them now that I'm just like counting up over the years, how many, because I taught 6th graders for 10 years. And the biggest thing they never used was punctuation, period. Like not even correctly. They just like they just chose not to use it. And so I remember coming up with strategies just to get them used to using periods, and then, then graduating to where do we stick them in the right places and things like that. So yeah, a lot of this is we come in assuming that they're going to be ready and they've had a lot of experience with this. But the reality is that, they have a lot of breaks. And our kiddos nowadays have also had that year and a half of just Zoom time where they weren't writing as much. And I can speak from a mom experience. My kids were not writing, and I was their teacher in class and at home too for them. So just from experience, yeah. But things to listen.
Well, and I think about the bridge from here, from learning these in writing to recognizing it in reading, and being able to pause appropriately as you're reading, and understand what that punctuation is really telling you. All right, thanks everybody for a moment. When we're talking about syntax, I'm going to put this slide deck in this video into the chat for us. But I just kind of froze it here and took a picture, because there's Nancy Hennessy from the Reading Comprehension Blueprint. And I found like this was a good illustration of what do we mean when we talk about syntax. We're talking about how those words are arranged. We're about that structure, how we combine words. And her definition there, it's the order and organization of words, phrases, clauses to convey meaning. So if I say, and even in our language, if I say sky blue, it's very different from blue sky. Sky blue is a color. I might pick a crayon that's sky blue, but sky is what I see out the window. Not tonight, but you get the idea. So in English, and that's going to vary with different language backgrounds. So in another, that order is not as important, or it might not have the same meaning as it does in English, but we can move those things around and it has a totally different meaning. So that's where we're saying the arrangement of the words and what that does to meaning. And that's something that some of our kids need to be explicitly taught. So one of the things that we did when I was at Chartwell, which was we were getting grades 1st through 8th, but I kept these and used some of these posters I made and these strategies with my students, even when I was teaching high school, granted high school special education. But I would have a poster for each of those parts of speech. And I would have a blue poster for my adverbs, because the adverbs answer those blue questions. Where is it happening? When does it happen? How much is it happening? So when I talked about under the table, that could be an adverb saying where he was sitting, or yesterday afternoon was saying when he was doing it. Extremely would be a how or a how much. Then we've got my nouns and my pronouns would be in green, the who and the what. And frankly, sometimes some of my gen ed English teachers also struggled with helping their kids find the who or what of a sentence, finding what is a noun versus what is the action, the verbs, which are red. And the reason why I like having the green and the red, I hope I'm not distracting, I should take off my background, is that if you think about the rules of the road, that we start with green and we end with red. And so your sentence has to have at least a green and a red, otherwise it's not a sentence. You have to have both. And so I found that the color coding helped my kids. It gave them a clue. For example, my prepositions were purple. Everyone after purple, you've got to have what color? You have to have a green, right? Remember, for me, for the girl, for the blah, 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 blah. You have to have a noun somewhere or a pronoun after a pronoun. I mean, I'm sorry, preposition. Otherwise, it's, I don't know, you're left it dangling. What do we call that? You don't end a sentence in a preposition, that's why. So helping our kids understand these relationships, really I do it through questions. I help them understand the roles that those words are playing, because as we talked about with the word bank, or when if we think about so many of our words like soccer or rock, and they can be nouns or verbs or adjectives depending on how they're used. Margie Gillis also talks about syntax. So I mentioned earlier, I'm going to have a video here from her on talking about syntax. I'm going to stick in the chat box. And I mentioned about syntax being that bridge between word reading fluency and then that text comprehension. So I like this image just so you can see how, again, we're moving from word by word to phrase by phrase to help kids access meaning. And that understanding of grammar and how the words are working together is really key on that. So I'm just going to give a moment with this image because I like it. See if there's anybody who wants to contribute or think of you. Comment on it. It just makes sense to me. This is another, Effie would be able to attest to this as well. Another one of my big things lately is I feel like too often we make this assumption that if kids can read words correctly and with good automaticity, that then they're going to automatically read a passage fluently with prosody. And it seems like it magically goes from word by word to, in a passage, being able to read with expression and pausing at the right places. Syntax will help your kids get there, recognizing where you break words into phrases, where you pause, what is the noun phrase, what is the verb phrase, what is the who, what of the sentence, and what did they do? So not only does it help you pause appropriately, but then it helps you understand it as well. So I'll get off that. I'll get off that soapbox for a second. And this is actually another illustration of that. What I was just saying, that we need to get the words right. Then we build the automaticity. We focus on those phrases and clauses to see how the words are working together so that they can be reading with expression. And then we can look at elements of cohesion to unite those into sentences and paragraphs, providing meaning. So again, I'm going to pause and just see if there's anybody who wants to jump in without anything here.
Talking a lot yesterday about transition words at the PSYOP training and how that helps with building. It wasn't a lot of conversation, but
Well,
a conversation about transition words. And it might have been actually down at Kabe too, that we were talking about transition words in one of the sessions, about that really advancing that. Oh, I know, I'm completely wrong. It was in the writing rope book study. I'm like, where was this? Where was I? What was I doing? It was in the writing rope book study, and we were talking about transition words, and then that helping Nina with the punctuation of where sentences and getting kids beyond first, next, last, and moving them into more advanced transitions with their writing. So that in turn would help position that. What I do like, Nina, is that your pun there about the children not using punctuation, period. That did not go past me. So whether the pun was intentional or not, I don't know.
I was successful as a middle school teacher for 10 years for a reason. So
So yeah, so thoroughly thinking of that just got me going with the phrases and the clauses and the transition words on that thought. I had to verbally reason where that came from, but it was the writing rope.
Thanks, Effie. And again, anybody who wants to just pause and kind of talk about these, jump in anytime. So how do we teach these, and what do we make sure we do is one, we want to make sure that we're teaching it logically and sequentially, and we're using this to support both their reading and the writing skills. I have a couple of resources that I'm going to put in the chat box for you. These are mostly from William Van Cleve's Syntax Matters. And he has a couple presentations on this. But I love the piece here, the third one. We don't need to do a lot of memorizing and excessive labeling. I had the colors for ease. I would just have them on my poster on the wall, and it was just up there as a reference that I could make reference to it if we needed to it. But whether something that memorization, especially for kids with dyslexia, that's going to be a struggle for them. So the more they understand the why, it helps them understand and remember better than asking them just to memorize. And then, of course, reinforcement activities that are guiding and engaging for their reading comprehension and their writing practice. So helping them, if, for example, if you give them a whole bunch of ideas as far as predicates, let them come up with different subjects that could fit those. Or Margie Gillis has a really fun little idea of a 2-minute sentence slam, where you would brainstorm as many animals as you can think of in 1 minute. And then you brainstorm as many things that animals do that you can think of in 1 minute. If we had more time, we would do this. It's fun. And then 45-second mini sentence slam. You take an animal from column 1 and an action from column 2, and you put them together. Birds fly, ducks walk, etc., etc. Then you can afterwards help your kids start expanding them. So if my sentence was, my dog herds, which dog? So tell me more about the dog. Expand that. So my ancient dog with brown and white spots. Notice I have with brown and white spots a prepositional phrase describing that dog. How does he herd? He herds with a back and forth motion. When does he herd? Every day after school. And why does he herd? Because he's crazy, or whatever it might be. So you can start, really building that. And even when you mentioned math, who was that who was talking about math? Was that Tessa, I think? That you might not have a lot of writing you do in math, but you could start with having them write about what if you, especially geometry, you could do a lot of, Alyssa, thank you. You could be describing what is this form? What are the characteristics of the form? What are the processes that you went through with this? Even if we just do 3 to 5 minutes of writing a day in every subject, we're gonna have a huge bang for our buck with our writing practice, our spelling practice. Quick writes are fantastic. I have lots of resources I'll share on those as well in another time. But this is a piece from William Van Cleve, and I'll put all those resources in our resource guide. There's just so much we could do on quick writes, get our kids reading. Boundaries are fantastic. Tell them how many sentences or how many seconds. You know what? We're gonna have 3 minutes. I want you to just get as much as you can. Don't worry about spelling and punctuation or anything like that. Nina, I saw you unmute.
Oh, I was, so when you were talking about the writing activity, it just made me think of something that I used to do with my students as well, and would even lean in on this, is just visual representation cards can be really fun with students when trying to get them activated on this. So what I would do is I would print out color cards, and it might be like a man playing a trumpet and there's a band behind him. And so what I would hold up the card and say, who did it? And they would say the man. And then I would say, what did he do? And they would say, play the trumpet. And then I would say, what did he do it to? And they would say, in the band, or something like that. And it would take practice and a little prompting for us to get kind of like a whole idea of what it was that we wanted to be engaging with the cards as well. But it was just a fun way for students to visually and orally also practice this work. So
I love that. Go ahead, Alyssa.
So I have a question, because and this is something that we just talked about in the beginning. So like when we went here when we first went to our groups, and that was about for me getting my students to write. So I'm finding that if I quarterly read questions and give them like the 30 seconds, 40 seconds to write down their explanations, then I actually get writing. But if I ask them to go off on their own to do it, I'm not getting the descriptions like written. And I don't know how to really facilitate like, hey, I want you to be writing more, other than I write on their page when I return it. But I don't want to dock them for not having a full sentence, if that makes sense. Like I want to look at the math, even though I'm encouraging that writing portion. And I'm not sure how to, and that's something that I'm trying to figure out myself. Like, how do I get them to write more and use, other than like having the definitions, explain this definition.
Right. A few pieces. Go ahead,
Alyssa, have you heard of kernel writing? Kernel essays? Kernel essays, and I can get the resource for that and have Alicia put it on there. Kernel essays give you like a small graphic organizer for them to fill in little boxes of the information, and then they write the paragraph. So it's about like an embedded graphic organizer that breaks it down and gives them those small chunks, and then each kernel turns into a sentence, which turns into your paragraph. It's pretty cool. It's pretty simple.
I was gonna add too, Alyssa, that it's building up to it and also having them rehearse orally first, because if they can't do that, then they can't write it. So you know that strong connection between oral, and I think that what you're doing, starting with choral, is a great place to start, because you're like, okay, it's making it a safe place that they can rely on each other, and we're gonna do this together. And maybe to do a gradual release of you're doing it to doing them. Okay, I'm doing it all now. You're doing parts of it. Then I'm going to do most of it, but you're doing parts of it. And then you're going to be doing a handover process and giving them the independence as you know they can.
Do you think that like there should be a place where I am grading that then in math, where I'm looking at their writing? Because that's the part that like for me that gets tricky, because I can encourage it as much as I can, but I just kind of stop it like, okay, well, I know you didn't write out the full sentence, but you have the math and you have the answer. So like that's what I'm kind of struggling with.
So I think that would depend on your school. So I'd love to hear what Robin has to say on it. But my first thought is it depends on your school's philosophy of every teacher, a reading and writing teacher. Because if the school is saying this is an emphasis we all want to put on, then yes, and so my yes and or instead of yes but is that I also really want to make sure we're not testing and taking off for things we're not teaching. Okay. So the more, if it is an expectation, we're teaching it, and we're saying this is how I expect you to do it, and then I want to make sure you know how to do it, and then I'll expect it and teach it. Okay. Robin, did you want to add?
Well, I was gonna just kind of say that, and what is your learning goal or target? Is it at sometimes it is the math, but sometimes it is the math communication, because part of mathematical literacy is being able to communicate not only the product, but the process and explain the answer. So that might be a separate learning target, separate success criteria, and then almost a separate grade in the grade book.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that is important to kind of think about in math, right? Because mathematicians don't just get problems and solve them, right? They think about concepts, and that concepts are told in language, and a very sophisticated language of both, because in math, words that mean one thing in every other subject means something totally different in math.
Yes.
Right? So having them recognize that is even a struggle. So I don't know, just some thinking.
I like that idea. No,
Yeah,
it's helpful.
Alyssa, I come from teaching back in the day when we had WASL. And even though I taught second grade and we only had WASL in fourth grade at that time, my whole building, which was a Vancouver school, the building I worked in, we every teacher did the whole process of the math, the write it and draw a picture, the whole like process. They were younger, they were second graders, so you might not but still to really put that context with the meaning, sometimes all of it. So it was just on the rubric, and the expectations were there. Yeah. To read, write, compute, draw,
yeah.
to follow the state guidelines for WASL.
Thanks, Effie, and thanks for bringing that to our attention, Alyssa.
Yeah, thank you.
What I wanted to share on drawing attention, I just like how this is talking about different levels of knowledge between knowing something. And again, Robin, and Alyssa, how can you define it in math? Can you define it? Can you identify it? Can you create it? And then can you apply and create that in application? Sorry, I don't have, I do have a mouse. It's easier for that. Anyway, and then across the top, when we're talking about in your writing skills, can I generate my ideas? Can I look at my understand the parts of speech and what the use it? look at that. I love how it goes from learning it, recognizing it, providing examples, using it in paragraphs. And then the same thing with sentences and essay parts, so that you can be like building to what they need to be applying from their content-based topics. So this is in one of the resources that we have as well. And I saw that Effie put in the other one on kernels, and I'll add that to our resource guide.
Yeah, it's not anything that's like research based in that link. It's just a teacher and some examples, but she has lots of examples in there.
Okay, great, thanks. This was another one from Nancy Hennessy's book, the Reading Comprehension Blueprint, and just again thinking about those different chunks, because starting with those parts, those individual words or phrases, building toward the different kinds of clauses, building toward the different kinds of sentences, building toward the different kinds of texts, and helping kids recognize that how they get larger and they can get way more complex. But all those complex things could be breaking down into their smaller, easier units. And so helping our kids recognize the deconstruction for understanding, as well as then their ability to construct it on their own. Because this is a great example. I love it. I think this was Louisa Moats. Yep. Remember, we were talking about the order and grouping words. I love this sentence. Who's got the bone? Does the boy have the bone, or does the dog chase the boy? The dog chased the boy. The dog with the bone chased the boy. That to be clear. But the dog chased the boy with the bone. The bone with the bone could be about doing the chasing, or it could be about the boy who has the bone. So we have to really be careful on the clarity of things like that. So when I teach them, as I've said, it's construction, it's deconstruction, sentence structure is so crucial. Helping them recognize when they're incomplete. So Alyssa, you mentioned that they don't write complete sentences. Let's help them see the illustration here. We have to have a subject and a predicate. My green are my subjects, my red are my predicates. I might have some adjectives that's describing my nouns. I might have some adverbs describing my verbs, and I might have a conjunction holding all and connecting those pieces together. And this is the prepositional phrase, which I mentioned earlier. Remember, I said purple has to be followed by green. So these are just helping them recognize the meaning in longer, more complex, or more difficult sentence forms. So helping them recognize these meaningful chunks. Okay. And then when we go beyond the sentence, oops, sorry, let me get that out of there for us, because I'm only have one screen. I'm sharing it open that way. That we go beyond from, as we saw earlier, there with at the end, going beyond the sentence form to the larger unit of discourse. What are we doing with that discourse? Are we using it to argue? Are we using it to inform and explain? Are we using it to narrate? And then once we understand the order and what we call the grammar of that discourse, we can more easily understand it in our writing and in our reading. This is connected to some of the standards, and I think this came from a WIDA training as well. Effie, WIDA?
Yeah, working with the and WIDA and the writing rope both align really well if you think about the oral language development to the standards with WIDA.
Thank you.
Yes, this is from Jennifer. So yes, this is aligned at 123.
Okay, well, that I think leads nicely into other aspects of structure of those different kinds of discourse. I think you were going to start here.
Yeah, so thinking about these graphic organizers, and if you are familiar with Jeff Zwires and the work he has done with graphic organizers for academic conversations, and that's a name that Alicia can grab Jeff's work and
ZWIERS.
ZWIERS. Lots of work, and he has these placemats on academic language and structure. And so this reminds me of some of his work. So thinking about here, what kind of graphic organizer organizer you might use if you're trying to describe something. Obviously, we're all familiar with sequencing, and so there's like card graphic organizers that for something of that nature, problem and solution. So, and those you tie that into teaching vocabulary of the words problem and solution is what I'd recommend right off the bat there, as those would be some tier 2 words. That what is a solution? Again, in science or math, things become different than what they might be in our other daily language. Compare and contrast, again, tier 2 words for vocabulary that have multiple meanings and used in multiple content areas. And then you have my favorite there, the Venn diagram, that I'm always constantly looking for overlap of all the projects I'm involved in. And so I think that helps make sense of things. So what's the similar, what's different? They tell the story that back in the day, I thought the end product when I was teaching was the Venn diagram. And I realized later that that was the setup. Sorting out toads and frogs and what they have alike and different wasn't the end all project that the writing needed to come after. So that's like first year teacher learning something there that I've never forgotten. Cause and effect. Again, tier 2 words that really this is rich vocabulary in and of itself, the structure words. For the kids, explaining what the graphic organizer is doing and how they are different. We know that sometimes we can have too many graphic organizers and it gets confusing for students, but we want to have enough to represent what we're trying to convey. Alicia brought up earlier about the oh gosh, now it's escaping me, the executive function of thinking about writing. And with some training I've been going through and talking about that how difficult it is to retrieve information, even when you tell kids it might be something they were familiar with. You know, talk about a time when you got the best birthday present you've ever received. And even pulling that kind of information can be daunting in that retrieval process. So having something like these specific organizers can be helpful. And we're all familiar with graphic organizers, but so just kind of that reminder.
Nina's looking for the way you said, Jeff Zweibeck. Wait,
Zweiers.
Zweier. I also have a favorite Zweiers. Jim Burke has a lot of graphic organizers. His book, it was Reading Reminders. I really liked its approach because it was saying that, you know, these are just reminders, folks.
Jeff did, I believe, the preface of our own Vancouver Gisela Ernst Slavitt academic language book. I think he did one of the prefaces of her books. And I say our own are from Washington State, Vancouver campus. So thinking about text types, oh gosh. And as we're thinking about the writing process, again, what kind of graphic organizer are we going to select to move into that direction with what students are writing? I still explain to my senior in high school sometimes, you know, I'm going to draft this out this way before I write it. I'm going to think about it in this way. As we know, a narrative is going to be much different in its structure than informational or opinion and argument. I think we're all pretty familiar with these.
These also came from that piece that I shared earlier. And so we've talked about a lot of these, but have students write about, you know, what can we do to help them, our kids write a lot and enhance reading, practices that enhance reading, have them write about what they read, teach them writing skills and processes, and increase how much they write. Yeah, I think I have a couple of more pieces here on that.
Because we do write a lot in the workplace. I mean, I probably write sometimes more than I read, with different projects. I like this workplace memo. What does that look like? What would you fill out? You know, in my daughter's math class, she's getting information on job application, and one of the other teachers from one of the electives focused on resumes, and those are important types of informational
I was looking for.
documents that we sometimes forget.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You were gonna
Right.
jump here?
Okay. So this, we've seen the simple view of reading and decoding times comprehension to decoding times language to equal comprehension. And so this simple view of writing, thinking about the writing, the transcription skills, times translation of information into a skilled writing expression. So it's a very simple explanation of writing. So we kind of move into something a little more advanced. So then we're going to move into the I forgot that I'm not running it, and so I get behind on my screen. Not so simple view of writing. So I just want you to take a look at this for a moment. And these are newer to me as well. So thinking about this in the Writing Rope, that book I previously mentioned, and thinking about the working memory, as we were just talking about, that executive function of paying attention, goal setting, revising, self-regulating, and that whole revising piece is part of the executive function of processing information, that I'm not just done, that I need to focus and go back. And this is a big piece that we haven't really talked about in the past as much.
Enough, yeah.
Hmm?
Or enough if we have
Enough. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it in this way. And then transcription, talking about spelling and handwriting, and then all of this being run, and then our text generation, like we're saying, trying to get kids to put something on the page. Well, if the executive function piece isn't working properly and the attention isn't there, then it's going to be difficult to get the ideas and the sentences out. And then we also have that kinesthetic piece and our physical abilities to either handwrite or keyboard. And putting all that together is really complex. So it helped me kind of settle in and think about how we might work with kids more when I started thinking deeper about the executive function. So I'm not gonna read these all to you, but when we think about what students need, these are 13 cognitive resources children have to draw on to write well, based on 2022 publication. So I want you to just take a minute, and if you have any thoughts on or connections with that, please jump in or add to the
knowledge of their writing environment, an interesting one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Knowledge of their effective writing needs. Like that'd be an interesting, like, what do you got to model for that?
Mm-hmm.
Both feet on the
And
ground.
how that gets skipped, because we always talk about who's the audience and what's the purpose.
Ah. But what do you need?
What do you need as a writer?
Ah.
Yeah.
I love that, Robin, because you're right. We do often skip that. We go right to what does your audience need?
Mm-hmm.
What you need. A different lens.
And some of these could go pretty, you could go much deeper into process knowledge.
Well, and the goal knowledge is, what are you trying to convey?
Mhm.
What's your point? Why are you writing? Mhm.
Something the other day came up about genres as well that was interesting too, and writing, that really, we have our types of writing we were just talking about, the narrative, the informational, and argument, but that's different than genre writing and understanding.
Like writing in science fiction is very different from writing
Yeah,
in historical fiction or
and writing, like, if you're trying to choose language that might be advanced for some sort of period in time as you work with secondary students, that, and then the content. Anyway, I think that's a really interesting slide.
me too. I encourage people to take pictures of it. If you can't, let me know and I'll grab one for you at some point.
Okay, here's kind of my my baby with multilingual connections. Thinking about language transfer and
Translanguaging?
translanguaging. It wouldn't come out. Language transfer, the application of linguistic features from one language to another by a bilingual or multilingual speaker. And the translation problems may arise due to differences in structure of sentences, cultural differences, compound words, verbs made up of two words, missing terms, words with several meanings, lack of technical knowledge, and limited time. So I added a Greek example that I grew up with. My house is translated to Speedy Moo. And so as you can see, it translates directly to Speedy is house. So, and Moo is my, so it's my house my instead of my house. So my father used to say things like, we're gonna go the car instead of going in the car. And so thinking about all those, and then yesterday again at SciUp, came up on being cautious about idioms and the work with that on how different cultural meanings with words. So this
It makes me think of an example from when I was helping. I'm close friends with a family from Bosnia who came during the 90s because of the war. They were political refugees. And Rosanna would always say to me, I like it too so much, Elisa. I like it too so much. It's the difference with our language.
yeah.
All right, we're gonna.
Okay, we're just touching on that. Okay.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Nina's going to talk us through some practice opportunity, and I'll make the breakout rooms for us. So Nina, you want me to jump here and we can.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. So all of the resources are going to be accessible through our resource page that we're going to go ahead and link here for you guys as well. But there's some strategies we would love for you to review. In the Jamboard, there's going to be some strategies for teaching sentence structure. So I invite you to think about what you would or what have you used to support your teaching. There's another strategy. There's another resource in the resource doc. It's a text structure graphic organizers. And we showed a little bit of those earlier with all the different examples of like the Venn diagram, the word web, all of those different text structure organizers will be in there. So again, thinking about how those might support your teaching. And then there's going to be some really in-depth information and documents around depth of knowledge, DOK, and also a cognitive rigor document for you to access when thinking about how to deliver some of this supports to students and ways that we want students to engage with each other around these these type of things. And so thinking about where we want them to be on the level of DOK. So all of these resources are going to be available for you to access while you're in your breakout groups. And then we're going to give you time to look through those, and then feel free to include any notes or anything like that on the Jamboard.
I'm gonna grab the Jamboard link is in the resources that I've just put back in, and the sentence structure statement or teaching sentence structure is on frame 6. So we do have frame 3 is the map, frame 2 is a parking lot, and then frame 6 has the list of different ideas for sentence structure. We did leave a few other things in just for food for thought rather than get rid of them for us. Okay. Any questions about what we're going to do? And these are our options. Number 4 is choose your own. Talk about whatever you want to, but we want to make sure you have some time to kind of grapple with things and process them. So I think we're going to increase the time a little bit, and I'm going to pause the read. And let's open the floor to one of our groups to share and start off some of the things that you discussed or explored. Who would like to start?
I can start. I'll talk this time for our group. What we just talked about, like what I think is that as middle school and high school teachers, sometimes we're so far removed from that kindergarten, that first grade, that second grade learning to read, that like now that we're getting these kids, because in my 6th grade classroom, I have 2nd grade readers up to 9th grade readers in one class. And where I've never had to worry about phonics or phenomes, before, and now all of a sudden we're in a situation where we do need to know this, but we don't know how to teach it and implement it. So we were just kind of talking about that, and then like meeting our kids where we need. So even like from a math standpoint, like there's so many levels, what can they actually do? And that it's going to take, professional development and working with others to get to a point where we're comfortable doing those pieces, and we need to be because our kids need it. But at this point, so coming to these is helpful to start going like, okay, like what can we start to implement, or what do we need to be aware of? And how that is helpful, even though sometimes you feel like you're drowning or not meeting the needs of the kids because you don't have the experience of teaching at a 2nd grade reading level.
Middle school and high school special ed teachers, and they're so overwhelmed, and they're crying because they feel such an urgency to do so much for their students so fast. And I have to tell them that you're not superhuman. None of us are. You have to take a deep breath and know that any small amount you do is more than if you hadn't been doing it.
Yeah.
And just little by little, that's all we can do.
That's the hope.
And that's why we're here offering this, because
Yeah.
we kept hearing about the dispersed, levels in secondary classrooms, and but my daughter came home from tennis and then quickly changed, is going to work. So yeah, that and the difference of that, when we have an elementary, we would have had the range, but it's not nearly the same way of going at it as a secondary, because if we have a kindergarten reader in a 2nd grade classroom, we can find materials that adapt for that. We can access things, but it's so much more challenging. And then that's where, how do you break this down? How do you provide them the structure? And you don't have them all day that how are they surviving in their content late in classrooms when they're needing that support? Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that very much. And thinking too that if you're in school that have been embracing the science of reading for the past few years, then the kids that you have quite possibly missed it.
And then the younger ones are focusing on this, and they haven't, and that was the case. But it hasn't, those kids haven't yet reached these teachers who are dealing with kids who are really had missed a whole bunch of these pieces. So thanks for sharing, Rachel. How about one of the other two rooms?
I'll go next. So I was talking to Robin, got tagged in for this one. And we started out with the teaching sentence structures, and it was just us two, so that was kind of cool. 'Cause, I kind of got like district help from another district, Robin. But so we talked about like what I do in the classroom and what Robin has done, and with her teachers. But then where we really got into it was the graphic organizers and how that can work with the different text structures. And I'm a social studies teacher, so specifically looking at those social studies text and nonfiction texts. And it was really interesting, that problem and solution graphic organizer. I do interactive notebooks, and one of the setups recently was that problem and solution setup. So it was just really cool to see that like right in front of me with this. And we talked about how different people could use different organizers for different things, but then also setting up the kids so that they can know what text they're sort of reading based on what they're finding with their definitions or their signal words, and getting that recognition in there as well. So that's what we really focused on for the most part.
Thanks, Miranda. You also made me think of one that, let me see if I can make a new slide here. How do I do this? There we go. That I used when I was teaching high school that I really liked, and let me get my pen here, that had, it would have a box and then it would had lines next to it. And particularly for something you're reading that has kind of episodes, I would have the students read a bit and then stop and draw something in the box and then caption it. So going into the right brain to kind of think about how would they represent what they had read, and then what's a caption for that drawing. So there was one, and this came from Jim Burke's reading reminders, one that had 3 boxes and then one that had 6. And just another graphic organizer to help us think about, because when you said you might need them for different purposes, it made me think of when I read Joylet Club, which I don't know if any of you have read that, but it's complicated. And I needed a graphic organizer to keep track of who was the tennis player and who was the chess player, and who I needed to take notes and keep that in mind, because otherwise it got really confusing. So thank you, Miranda. Would the Heights group like to share? I'm gonna put my headphones back on because someone's coming in.
Well, we talked about primarily that our students' writing skills are much lower than, where they should be standard-wise. And so just different ways to back up and infuse some of the basics and solidify those skills so that we're not skipping over them. And one of the things that I do in my classroom with my co-teacher, we have a rubric that the students look at when they turn in a rough draft, and that will help them kind of edit through what they need to do, and then we fill it out as well. And I'm thinking we need to be more explicit in some of those more basic skills. We have them all kind of grouped together because in our classroom we have juniors and seniors, and so we sort of expect, oh, we can tell you a blanket thing of check your punctuation, spelling, capitalization, grammar, blah, blah, blah. But we're just not getting the quality of editing from the students that we need. And I think if we back up and infuse some basics in the rubric and then have some supports for them, that would be a great place for, at least for our classroom, to start.
Sorry about that. Definitely agree. Thank you for sharing, Mary.
Would anyone else like to add anything before we close up and show our last few slides?
I wanted to add what I really heard consistently is small chunks. And I really appreciate that because I think, especially in secondary, it can be really overwhelming. I think a little bit what Rachel was saying is because we were in the group together, just trying to figure out how do we, I just all I always think about is grade level content, but my child can't read it. And my
Yeah.
child, it's they can't read it, they can't comprehend it, you're just thinking as a teacher, getting overwhelmed, but taking a step back and saying, I might know bits and pieces of Scarborough's rope. I understand the concept of simple view of reading. How, am I able to do like one instructional added, not even changing my instruction, but just being more intentional around one instructional practice and thinking about how that can affect literacy in my classroom. Like just that mind shift of like, we're not going to understand it all, you know what I mean, right now. We're going to keep working on it, but we probably could say, oh, we all do vocabulary. Could we take one piece of it, or, one sense, well, it's every building is different, but I appreciate that because it's the only way to get some is better than none. So I'm going to keep reminding myself that. Yeah.
You start somewhere.
Yeah.
And Melissa, when you said it can be overwhelming, it made me think of, well, one, how often, and Effie and Nina could attest to this, do people say my classes are overwhelming? But it's like, come again, we'll keep doing it, we'll keep doing it. But it makes me think of a grammar class that I had in college that was really hard. I mean, most of everyone were just kind of like, and I grew up with a very strict grammar upbringing where when I was in French and we were learning the difference between qui and que, and my light bulb went off and I said, oh, it's the same thing as between who and whom. My classmates looked at me like I had 3 heads. But there was this one in college, it was so hard. I just just keep copying what he asked, just copy it down, and eventually it starts to sink in. You just, little by little, we'll get there. And especially the more we apply it, the more we get there, aren't we? Well, it is almost 5:30, so I just want to go through our last few things, just as a reminder of our framework to keep in mind that there is support. We have those regional implementation coordinators, we have our regional literacy coordinators, and we can get to all students getting the literacy support that they need. These are the rest of our series. Where we're going next time is going to text sets, supportive instruction, some accommodations. How can we help our students despite the fact that they're not reading, or while they're learning their reading skills, to make sure they're staying in with their content as well. So if you have one last thing that you'd like to add into either the Jamboard, the chat, or unmute, something that stood out to you today, is what was something you want to take away? That's why I did a takeaway container. So why is it important? That's the heart. It's where's the heart to it? And then now what? Melissa, I loved how you said that the pieces, but just sometimes even just being a little more explicit in what we do. Because we may think that it makes all sense to us. I'm guilty of that as well. Feeling like, of course, I add in practical strategies all the time, but if I'm not explicit about it, others may not see what I see. So I'll just give you a moment for that while we add on some appreciation and the resources. Don't forget the asynchronous courses that are available through OSPI, my classes that are available, and to contact us any questions, supports, or anything you need. So thank you for your engagement. And I will close off the recording.